is Monday, March 10th, 2025. This is the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Tanya, can you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Okay. We are now at the next general business item, which is the opportunity for public comment. Do we have any that signed up to speak?
We do not.
Okay. All right, moving into our first action item for this evening would be the approval of the minutes from last month. Is there any discussion or follow-up?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Dr. Piasek and seconded by Mr. Zenobia. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Our next action item is the approval of the vouchers. Did we have any questions?
We did not.
Okay. Be looking then for a discussion or motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Dr. Piasek, seconded by Mr. Wad. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. All right, so we are going to make a brief change in the agenda by moving up the audit report discussion in favor of the auditors as they share our progress on our last year's audit report. They are joining us virtually, I believe.
Yes, this will be Brad Porter. He's going to be on sharing the results of the 2023-24 audit school year. And hey, Brad.
How's everyone doing?
Very good. So, and he'll be able to take questions then also along the way and or after. Go ahead, Brad. Oh, go ahead.
I'll have your hard copies on your desk.
So, go ahead, Brad.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Porter, and I'm here on behalf of Lauterbach and Amon as the principal overseeing the district's financial statement audit process. Here to provide just a brief recap of the documents that we've issued at the conclusion of our fiscal year 2024 reporting cycle. I really appreciate the opportunity to remote into the meeting tonight. And before I begin my coverage of the audit documents, I wanted to give an extra special thank you to Heather, Darren, Michael, and the various others that played a significant role in getting to this point tonight. I know L&A, our team, has very much appreciated the relationship that we've built with the district staff over the last couple of years. And it's exciting to see from our perspective that the district is already taking action on some of the recommendations that we've made via our management letter. I know that just yesterday, Heather and I actually had a conversation about how your team can ensure one of our recommendations is addressed. So that should tell you something. The last couple of years have undeniably posed challenges statewide with changes to the method in which districts submits their financial data to the DPI, new GASB pronouncements that have come our way, staffing changes within the district, you name it. We all know change is hard, and there have undeniably been challenges for your district staff in making sure the demands of the new reporting structure are in place, and you are most certainly not the only district encountering those similar challenges. So we've greatly appreciated the patience all around from our perspective by your team. I know from our perspective this year too, on a personal note, it was a little bit of a curveball year from our end. I took a 10-week leave of absence for the birth of our twins who decided to show up 10 weeks early. So I've learned a little life lesson here, and that's to always make sure you have a backup plan. But I know we're really looking forward to ensuring that this audit is presented in January next year, and I'm sure your team would echo the same sentiments. Now, at the conclusion of our audit process, we issue 3 pieces of required communication that I'd like to briefly discuss here this evening. I believe I should have access to share my screen, which should allow you to follow along with the required documentation. Bear with me here. All right. Can everybody see that on the big screen?
Yes.
Very good. I know you do have paper copies as well, so feel free to follow along as you please. The first piece of required communication is a 3-page letter that we issue in accordance with Statement on Auditing Standard number 114. We are required to state whether or not we had any disagreements or difficulties that we had encountered with management during our audit process. And I'm happy to report that in the body of that letter, you will find no such difficulties and no such disagreements noted, as I have highlighted on the screen here. Only one paper copy of that letter was sent to district staff, so you may not have that one tonight. No need to pull it up. All good news there. Now, as we work into our annual financial report, there are 89 pages in this audit document. So my job tonight is going to be to help break things down into a little bit more digestible format. For the sake of our presentation, feel free to slow me down at any point, but I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the more important sections from our perspective. Ironically, beginning with page 1. On page 1, you'll find our Lauterbach name and letterhead here. This is what we call our independent auditor's report. Ultimately, we are hired as your audit firm to ensure that we're generating an opinion on the financial statements that are provided to us. Your job as management is to ensure that a clean set of financial statements are ultimately turned over to us so that we can do our audit procedures. I'm happy to report for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024, we have issued what is known as an unmodified opinion, which is the cleanest form of opinion that any governmental entity can ultimately receive. So congratulations. What that states is, from our perspective, we believe the financial statements to be presented fairly in all material aspects. And we do conduct various internal control walkthroughs to ensure that there are safeguards in place over district funds. And you will find, as we get into the management letter here, we had no recommendations pertaining to your internal control environment, which is fantastic. And I know oftentimes something that boards like to hear. So again, congratulations on the clean audit opinion for fiscal year 2024. I also wanted to highlight page 7. Page 7 begins what we call our management's discussion and analysis section. I'll be the first to admit that oftentimes the financial statements themselves can be a little bit difficult to digest. GASB has certain financial statement names that don't necessarily make sense to the non-accountants out there. So I oftentimes like to point out this section because it provides a narrative overview of the fiscal year. And I think boards oftentimes find this section to be a very good bird's eye summary of the fiscal year under audit. It's going to contain a lot of comparative information, some financial highlights, so on and so forth. So if you're going to invest your time and energy on one section of the audit, I would absolutely encourage it be this one here. Now, as we scroll to our financial statements, I just wanted to point out our general fund for fiscal year 2024. I know we are in early March here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual financial picture of the district as of June 30th, 2024. But I did want to draw your attention to page 22. And I'm going to scroll in a little bit here so you can follow along. But ultimately, we have columns for our general fund, special education, capital expansion, and then non-major. And that would be any funds that are contained within the back schedules of the audit report that don't meet basically the GASB requirements for a major fund. So midway through the page, you'll find our revenues, expenditures, and there's a line item called excess or deficiency of revenues over or under expenditures. The way we look at this from an audit perspective is what we call our operating income. So for fiscal year 2024, the general fund reported income from operations of about $13.8 million, or I guess $13.7 million rounded down, prior to transferring money out to special education and other funds. So for fiscal 24, there's a net change in fund balance of about $7.2 million, and that is a reduction in our overall fund balance, ending the year with $47.6 million in accumulated fund balance. And for reference, we have approximately 3.7 months of operating expenditures in our unassigned fund balance in the general fund, which is kind of right where you want to be in terms of operational targets. Now, as we work our way into the management letter, the primary purpose of our management letter is going to be to convey any best practices that we see across some of our other school districts, any upcoming accounting pronouncements, and any internal control weaknesses or recommendations that we've made to the district. This management letter is broken up into two sections. We call it current recommendations and prior recommendations. Current recommendations being anything that we had identified as a result of our fiscal year 2024 audit. Prior recommendations being anything that we've accumulated since onboarding the district as a client a couple of years ago. So for fiscal year 2024, a best practice in the industry is to ensure that we have an outstanding check write-off policy that is documented. which basically outlines what the district's policies are for the Wisconsin Department of Revenue's unclaimed property statutes. The district is abiding by those statutes, but it's always best from an audit perspective to ensure that we have those policies and procedures documented and part of our comprehensive policy plan. So we've, I believe at this point, already provided the district a sample policy for this, and I would anticipate and hope that this is a comment that is very easily implementable for fiscal year 2025's reporting. We also had 3 prior recommendations. One is what we call commingled cash. So ultimately, commingled cash results when one bank account is spread across all of your audit reported funds. And when you have, ultimately, you cannot have a negative share of commingled cash in a fund. So this is kind of a wonky GASB adjustment that's required at year end that we're going to ultimately assist the district with for fiscal year 2025. And that was the comment that Heather and I were actually bouncing ideas back and forth this morning. So everything should be covered on that front. We also had an update for capital asset policy. Ultimately, the district does have a policy in place, but there are some GASB 34 requirements for a best practice. I guess I'll use the term requirements loosely. Best practices that outline estimated useful lives and other kind of GASB terminology items for the capital assets of the district. So again, we've provided a sample policy and we'll look to ensure that the district's policy is updated for the next reporting cycle. And then the last prior recommendation that we had that we provided an update on for 2024 was what we call funds over budget. We are required to indicate whether the district exceeded your internal working budgets for any of the audit reported funds. So we did have a variety of those for 2024. Again, this is a rather insignificant comment from our end because we understand that from a timing standpoint, we're coming in at year end and posting audit accruals, which are increasing our expenditures, ultimately pushing us over budget. So this is one of those kind of best practices just to ensure that you've got an eye on your total fund budgets throughout the course of the year. And that concludes my coverage of the required communication. I am more than happy to answer any questions, comments, or concerns that you might have. I know there's a lot to digest, so if anything comes up after the fact, certainly have Darren or Heather reach out to me.
So we do. I just want to allow us a little bit of time to look through the pieces. So just a couple things that I just want to draw out. So when I'm taking a look at the financial statements, it would be that our structural deficit coming in is the 3.464 million. Is that correct?
Your structural deficit?
So we are upside down coming in before we pull from the general?
Yes, that would be correct. You had, I guess, for all governmental funds, we had an overall reduction in fund balance this year of about $3.4 million.
Correct. Okay.
Just to follow up on that number, it's important to point out, especially people who won't be in this room hearing it probably, but that was a budgeted drop in fund balance. That was used to fund phase 3 of the CIP projects, was auditorium improvements, the bleachers at South, some HVAC. So that was a planned one-time budget deficit. So I don't think to classify as the structural deficit is appropriate in this. Generally, that would be the case, but we had set out to lower fund balance on purpose that year.
So, but I think that's a fair call out, what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Like, I would like to highlight that some of the pieces that we're talking about are actually
They were intentional.
decisive, strategic, and ways in how we're managing it.
So,
Mr. Wad?
yeah, so is that number, is all of that for those capital projects?
You hit your mic.
Is that for all of the projects we worked, or is there a piece of that that is
Some of that could have
structural?
been site carryover budget. I think there was some textbooks involved in that as well, but the biggest part of that would have been the phase 3 CIP projects.
Okay, thanks.
And I did just want to add that there are several budgetary schedules in the back of the report. If you are interested in how a certain fund performed or how a certain function within a fund performed, there are several budget to actual schedules reported throughout the back schedules of our audit, beginning on page 65.
Great. I want to move into just a couple of the audit recommendations. The first one in regarding to outstanding checks, I think I'm just curious as to, do we have, or could we get the details on the aging of our outstanding checks? Do we have any that are greater than a year?
I will have to follow up with my staff because she's been working on it. I have one staff member, Maureen, who has been working on it, so I'll get that information to you by Friday.
Okay, and then to follow up on that, that would trigger the unclaimed property reporting.
That is correct.
Okay,
We've had a standing procedure, it's just never been reduced to policy,
Correct.
okay.
so.
And then last, I just want to get back to what I heard was a carryover from prior year, which was our capital policy. And I thought we went through discussions last year that we do indeed have a policy. We went back and corrected and said, we are aware of a policy, we follow that policy. So to hear it again this year, I think I would just like some clarification.
Brad, are you able to speak that?
Yes, most certainly. So I will add that the district absolutely does have a fixed asset policy or capital asset policy in place. GASB 34 suggests that ultimately you have a fixed asset capitalization dollar amount or threshold. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the district's was, but I think it may have been in the 5,000 range. Feel free to
Correct.
correct me if I'm wrong, Heather.
Correct.
5,000.
Yep. And so for a district of your size, it's actually creating quite a bit of added work to capitalize every single purchase over $5,000 that's capital in nature. So GASB allows the district to actually implement what we call a tiered capital asset policy. And what that means is you can utilize $5,000 for small equipment, but then we can increase that capitalization threshold to $50,000 for larger infrastructure projects. So it ultimately tries to alleviate some of that administrative burden of fixed assets by tiering our capitalization thresholds. And it is something that we're more than happy to work with district staff on, kind of developing appropriate capitalization targets. But that's kind of the premise of our underlying comment there.
Okay, so this is less of a management letter comment versus a procedure or policy on how we're actually doing the work.
Yep.
So right, wrong, and
Exactly.
different, as a district, I could still decide that I wanted to stick with the 5,000 and be just fine to be compliant with all of the rules.
Yeah. We've been at 5,000 for decades.
Yep. Yeah, it's important to distinguish like a true weakness from a best practice. And this is definitely a best practice type comment. This is not by any means a weakness of the district, but we do try to provide value outside of just the opinion that we're giving on the financial statements. And this management letter is a way to do so by communicating matters that we've seen across some of our other school districts.
Any other questions?
I just want to clarify that. I'm sorry to beat it. I want to make sure that I understand, though, because when I look at our fixed asset policy, and I know we've talked about depreciation and ownership and other things in the past, so this is an opportunity to raise the threshold for procedural efficiency, but it's not a finding. It's not a non-compliance
Now,
finding.
our processing of the $5,000 limit that we've had was properly implemented this fiscal year. Now it's a matter of them saying, there's a better way to do it. Do you still need to depreciate down to $5,000? It's more of a suggestion. There's no requirement for us to change anything in our policy.
Could I just ask for clarification on the stewardship aspect, which is the physical custody of capital assets?
Well, from my end or from
Yeah, yes,
district
please.
staff?
Sorry, Brad, from your end, yeah.
Well, awesome.
that
Sorry.
mean to you?
I wasn't sure who that was directed to. So from a physical custody standpoint, I think it's important that your fixed asset policy outline procedures for safeguarding of physical district-owned assets. And again, the GASB 34 compliant policy that we maintain and share with our clients does outline processes for inventorying assets and making sure that there are safeguards in place over the custody of those assets. So I think ultimately, in short, the district has a satisfactory policy, but what it doesn't necessarily cover is fixed asset thresholds by asset classification that's reported in your audit, which the district reports land, construction in progress, site improvements, building, and furniture and equipment. So having different thresholds that are capitalized by asset class, and not only that, but also establishing useful lives that the district staff is going to use for depreciation purposes. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the current policy that the district has in place does not say we're going to amortize our buildings over 20 to 50 year useful life. So that's kind of that second component that we would recommend adding.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'll just follow up with you. I have more questions as you peel the onion back on that.
Do we want to get any of those questions out?
Well, so to me, right, it's precedent. So I understand having the asset classes and the useful lives, but if I take a look at what are we actually doing? So how long are we depreciating our buildings? Is it 19? Is it 39? Is it 40? Is it inconsistent? And, okay.
Yep. I would say from our perspective, it's a little bit inconsistent, which is why recommending a policy helps to kind of develop some consistency there and give district staff and the auditors some precedent as to how is this building going to be depreciated.
Understood. Any other questions, comments? All right, I would say thank you. There's a lot of questions, and this is a very short amount of time for us to digest, and of which I look forward to actually digesting and having some more follow-up questions. But the reality is that we are judged on the success of that by getting a clean opinion, of which we do within the unmodified, and that's the best that we can get, which speaks to the volumes of managing this district as the seventh largest and doing it effectively and efficiently. I will gladly take recommendations on improving workflow over any other types of pieces that they can find. So I think this is great.
And actually, let me say a thank you to Mike Gotch. I don't know how, Mike's our accountant.
We met him last month.
Oh, that's right, he was here. And then Heather, they certainly took the lead on this. And LA was a great partner as we navigated the new DPI reporting requirements, and they put a stall on this for about 2 months, I think, extra. So next year, hopefully we can avoid that. And we look forward to only working in 2 fiscal years now.
Yeah, yes,
So-
we do.
Yeah, it's very appreciated. Nicely done, team.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate your help.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.
Okay, so we are moving back then into our next action items, which is a follow-up to the 3121 FICA alternative plan that we discussed last month.
Yeah, last month, and actually a Friday update leading up to last month's meeting, we were sharing information on what I believe to be a little-known benefit plan in our 3121 Social Security alternative plan, which has been in place, I believe, around 20 years. So tonight, the administration is recommending that we return all part-time, seasonal, and temporary employees to Social Security effective July 1st at the start of the next fiscal year. Because we just have a feeling that it's a better benefit to move them back to Social Security, standard Social Security, than what we're offering now. I'm not saying that there's not some people that this is a great fit for, but for the majority of the people out there, it's our belief that Social Security is a better option, and it would relieve us of the administrative burden of trying to keep up with all these people, many of whom haven't set foot in the district in decades. So I asked Connie, our payroll supervisor, and Marge, who has the privilege of overseeing HR's hourly staff. And so Marge is here from a hiring and kind of educating staff, and Connie's here from the day-to-day implementation. And you guys can come up to the table. So they're here to answer any questions. I just want to make sure we had it covered. Connie also handles the changing of someone who starts in this plan and then a few months later, all of a sudden they're in WRS, the Wisconsin Retirement System. And so we're here to answer any questions you might have. I attached that same document that shows the math between an employee's check with and without the Social Security Alternative Plan. Hopefully that answers any questions you might have. Otherwise, we're looking for feedback on what we're recommending.
Mr. Wad?
Thank you. I'm just curious, so if we discontinue this going forward, what happens to the funds that are currently, or what happens to the accounts that currently have funds in them? And do we maintain an administrative responsibility for those at all going forward?
No, those are the individual's accounts, just like your 401K would be. It would travel with them. So we have no obligation to communicate or, and we plan on providing information to district staff or former district staff as well on a website just for contact information, but we have no fiduciary responsibility over those funds.
So communications would be sent out, though, of course, to existing employees.
Yeah.
We would notify them. We had, how we did it several years ago in 2019, we did pull back the program because, again, as we discussed last month, that we were losing event workers and coaches who did not want to participate in this plan. So we sent a communication via email and a letter, and we notified the athletic directors as well at that point. So we would have, again, several communications going out to the employees. We would have it posted as well. We have another communication called the Explorer that we would send out. So again, multiple communications, so employees in this plan would understand that it is going away as of June 30th, and then with contact information for U.S. Bancorp, Mid-America, as to how they can obtain their funds. Normally, there's if they're an active employee, a 2-year waiting period, but I do believe that we could have an exception for this since we would be discontinuing the funds. It would just be up to us to authorize that for the employee so they could have their funds, because after 1 year of inactivity, they would be charged then that $1 per month. And we, of course, would try to avoid that for them. And then as far as past employees who have terminated, there's thousands, 2,300 approximately. So we would probably ask Mid-America to send another communication to them, notifying them of the discontinuation of the plan, because again, we do not necessarily have updated addresses for them since they've termed, some have termed 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So we don't necessarily have, for that type of fluid population, because there were a lot of interns and co-ops or substitute teachers, retirees in the plan. And if they have moved on, then we may not be able to, we would not have that information for their address, but Mid-America should, as at the end of each year, they do send out a statement in January notifying them of the balances. So U.S. Bancorp, again, did improve the plan considerably this last year with their merge with Mid-America. So Mid-America was not very helpful with communications. They were not real forthright, but U.S. Bancorp seems to be doing a much better job, as we have seen it in our departments with the requests for dispersal.
And I think we clarified last month as well, is because we're not the custodial of the funds, in theory, the obligation, while we can do our best diligence to inform current, we would just, the obligation and the responsibility does not fall on the district. So with that, I mean, I think it's important to have a plan as a transition with any offboarding of anything to make sure that for sure, we do the best to reach out to who we can. And I would like to make sure that we do have a follow-up from, who's it, U.S. Corp?
U.S. Bancorp?
Or, yeah, that they are indeed going to be able to do and send out those letters. I think we do need confirmation, because I think that's part of our responsibility, is to make sure that we're handing it off to the best that we can.
Okay.
Are you saying that as a contingency?
I am not.
Okay.
I'm not. I think it's just part of the practice and the responsibility as we take this on going forward. I would expect nothing less.
What if they don't?
If U.S. Bancorp does not send them out,
I just want to make sure I understand what the expectation is.
Well, I think our expectation ends with, we're going to try to partner with US Bank Corp to make sure that we are sending, or communication is going out. I can't be responsible for forcing another entity to do what I think is great customer service.
So I think our responsibility, though, is to our existing, our active employees. But employees who are no longer active in the district, then that would more or less fall on them. But Darren and I will work with our representative there to make sure that something is sent out.
I think after our discussions last month, I got a sense that the committee was strongly in favor of moving forward with this, so I don't, unless there's other comments or concerns, I think that I'd be looking for a motion.
Also move.
I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Borowski, seconded by Dr. Piasek. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the new grandbaby.
Oh, yes.
That's right, yeah.
All right, our next action item for the evening is the 2025-2026 student fee schedule.
Yeah, last month, or every time this year, the finance committee, eventually the board approves the next school year's student fees, just because we're starting to ramp up registration materials and all of that, so we need to get some of these numbers squared away. And we're not recommending any changes, if you recall our conversation last month, except for we were looking at the parking fee primarily due to the anticipated change in North's parking situation. So after taking your feedback, and I thought I should bring back a recommendation, but really this is up to the committee to decide. We can certainly leave it where we are, which seems to be the kind of the standard. If you look at the survey for Waukesha County, I included that again this month for your review. But we're recommending a drop to $75 a semester versus $100. So that's our recommendation. Just a reminder on the student fee schedule, the final food service fees, there's a minimum that we have to charge. We haven't had to change it the last few years, I don't believe. But there's some calculations we do. We're asking that we just be able to do that automatically rather than coming back, and a lot of that's federal regulations one way or the other. So we're looking for approval, so the schools and everyone we can load up campus and get all the fees loaded for registration for the 25-26 school year.
Any comments or discussions? I think I will start with kind of where I was coming was no change at all. I know that we talked about that North High School losing one parking lot would be a distinction, but I think across the board, we're consistent across schools, we're consistent across the district. But the one part that I think we always talk about is where do the funds go? And really watching how the funds come in and they don't just kind of poof, disappear into other expenses. But it is an opportunity for us to start to track some of the fees and how they're coming in. I don't want to say it's something for the rainy day, but as we start to address and really look at our revenue streams or resources that are coming in that we use to operate, in this case, those funds are used to operate the facilities, maintenance, parking lots, wherever they may go, because I do think that there is some value in having an idea of what and where those are, how much that is and where it goes, just as the commonality is that we start to track our budgets and what we're doing with all of that, so we can have a clean view of, at some level, things that come in and where they're being applied to. Otherwise, it gets lost, and as we start to take a look at other pictures, it's hard to say what we really have versus what we don't have.
We can do that. We have it, we've just never put it into a formal report, but we can easily implement that.
Well, because I think I did just raw math, so just assuming that it's $100 a semester per child, assume that's 2,400 kids, it's $375,000-$80,000. And that's probably a little high. I think 2,400 students driving might be too high, but it's not a insignificant number, even if it's, I would say 200 to 300,000 is a value that we could pinpoint to be using towards specific things.
Okay.
I thought
Mr. Wad? Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I thought I saw somewhere in there, was it 107,000 or? am I-
107's been the last year.
Yeah,
COVID gives you bad data, so it's hard to know, but it's a sizable amount of money, but it is a fee that gets a lot of attention, right? We get a lot of questions on, that's probably my most common fee question we get. And it does go towards trying to maintain and manage, those parking lots. I do think there's a value to us also in this doesn't really define the fee, but for us to know what cars are in our parking lot, and knowing that they should or should not be there, I think is another advantage of doing this. But I do think where we end up with this recommendation is we're below our neighbors, and I think we reevaluate a year from now, just like we do the fees on an annual basis.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so this is just a bit of an aside, and if this has been covered in the past and I've forgotten, I apologize. Do the fees stay with the sites, or do they go into a fund that get,
We track them by site, but they all are brought centrally.
okay,
Because the maintenance department, the biggest user of those fees is a central budget.
right,
So they directly offset each other.
okay, thank you.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I think it's commendable that the district has maintained fees at the same level for quite some time. And I think it just reflects a concerted effort to not push an increase in costs and things onto individual students and families. And I think in the Midwest, we kind of sometimes take for granted, unless you drive downtown a lot, that, you just get to park your car wherever you want to park it. I have friends who live on the East Coast who pay more for parking than we paid for daycare. So I can appreciate that there are different thresholds of parking. It's one of the fees that, probably, like you say, Darren, it stands out the most because, up until this potential for a change, it's been as high as the athletic fee. And if I think about what's involved in coordinating athletics and the cost and the overhead and, the resources and effort that go into that, parking a car on a slab of concrete is not quite the standard of athletics, right? So I struggle with the parking fee a lot, but then I also see our SROs spend quite a bit of time navigating the parking lots. I see, we've got a lot of new drivers and there are things that need to be kept in order. And then I also appreciate that the district does a reasonably nice job of keeping things up to date and clean and safe and manageable. So I am happy to see that we have some flexibility to lower the fee. And I think this would be a good step towards seeing what that looks like in the next year. But I'd like to continue to evaluate where we're at with some of these things, because I think in the grand scheme of things, this is still the most expensive thing for a student to do as far as fees go. And I can appreciate that we are, now at the low end of parking fees of our, neighboring districts in the county, but I like to consider what we could possibly do going forward. But I'm happy with the movement in this direction.
And you bring up a good point that you kind of forget about this. Our last changes in fees was actually the elimination of course fees. Now, maybe there was some small food service fee changes, but I don't think there's been many of those over time. And we're at the lowest threshold we can be per federal regulations. So if you compare us to other neighboring school districts, I know I always tell this story, so I apologize. We got rid of course fees, and Elmbrook did it a year later, and they got a story in the Freeman. So, so there are, McGuanago has no course fees, I think, still, but other high schools in this county I'm sure those fees are as much as the parking fee is by the time you add all those courses together. So I do think we're in a good spot as a district in terms of trying to make this as affordable a district as possible.
Okay. I think this is the only fee that we were recommending this month that we're actually decreasing. And so this is a action item. If we're good, we'd be looking for a motion to approve the recommendation.
I would move to approve the fee schedule as presented.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Watts, second by Mr. Zenobia. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. All right, moving into our discussion and information items, we are now talking the 2025-2026 budget development.
Yeah, just a quick update. The Governor Evers released his budget proposal for the next biennial budget in late October, and I know I put a nice couple-page summary in there from one of our state organizations that the only downside of these kind of summaries is a lot of it's talked about in statewide dollars. So to sit here and say, well, the impact on SDW is going to be X or Y is pretty difficult to do. But I thought I'd share it with you. And there's some common themes that we've talked about and probably talk about every 2 years. You know, what's the increase in the revenue limit per pupil multiplier, maybe some per pupil aid, the categorical aid. The one that we've, not that we have a huge lobbying effort, but one that we talk about on a regular basis is handicap aid for reimbursement on special ed services. So the governor's recommended 60%. That would double the amount of aid that we get. I'll caution, and I know you know this, but for people, the governor's budget, just like the DPI budget, also asks for the moon, right? There's no target they have to hit. But I think it's a good start to that conversation. Obviously, special ed services is a growing need for our student population. And then right now, state law for per pupil revenue limit increase is $325 per year for the next 399 years. But he is recommending $334 and $345 the following year for 26, 27. That, again, historically, a very significant increase. But I think our focus, again, in terms of our being on the same basis as some of our neighbors, if you hear about these conversations, the low revenue ceiling, once again, is the most interesting one because it rewards the districts that have the slowest or lowest revenue limit per pupil funding. So I just highlighted those. There's a lot of other things within this document. I don't think I need to read through them all. But if you have questions on them, I'd be happy to take a look at that. I also included our budget building calendar for your review, and then our resident enrollment, our third Friday count, which looks the same kind of every year, and that steady decline that we've been facing. But you know, as I was looking at the governor's proposal, I couldn't help but think that the biggest pieces to that puzzle for our future is tied directly to resident enrollment, whether it's per pupil categorical aid or revenue limit calculations. I did some very rough math. We need to, if we lose another 200 to 250 students, we need an increase in the revenue limit per child of about $100 just to break even, essentially. I think it was $93 or some math like that. So a lot of it's just being put in place. So as these ideas come forth, and certainly the handicap aid, that's different, but we're incurring great costs to get the 60 cents on the dollar under his proposal. So that's not a clean win either. So, but as we've discussed, our SDW's declining enrollment trend is projected to continue, into the middle of the 2030s. So, and there's no evidence that I've seen that says anything to the contrary, whether it's hearing what universities are talking about or other school districts in the state. Actually, a neighboring school district to ours is going to be having a conversation about enrollment, I believe, at their meeting tomorrow night. So we're not alone in that in facing that challenge, but yet we have 80% of our operational revenue going through formulas where the key factor is resident enrollment. So obviously, that's a challenge, but again, not one that STW is alone in facing. So I've been giving it more thought, and Dr. Siebert and I have had conversations, and I've had conversations with some of the committee members here. Our strength, and I remember I said in a news story not too long ago that we were in good standing, or I forget my verbiage, and everyone, or there was a crisis. But really, what I was trying to point out in that story is our strength is in sound projections, planning, and implementation. That's what makes us sound, and we're not reactionary, as well as we possibly can be. And I do think more of that is needed now. Instead of looking at our budget as a 12-month snapshot, well, we made it. We're good for 12 more months. I do think we're at this point where rather than trimming departments and grabbing sections because the kids just aren't there, that SDW should consider a long-range vision of where we're heading. I think it's time for, and it hasn't been done in a long time, it's also pretty difficult for an organization our size, but I think a thorough review of who we want to be and what our structure or footprint or whatever will look like, because again, declining enrollment is not, barring some major change, is not going anywhere. So I put in my executive summary, and I'll repeat it here. Though it may be tempting to wait and hope that the state of Wisconsin will answer all of SDW's short and long-term fiscal challenges, the more prudent and necessary action is to continue to seek out operational efficiencies and maximize available assets. I think we need to take what I would guess would be probably the rest of this calendar year and really develop a plan to help us in making decisions, whether it's do we put a new boiler in a school or something as simple as that, as to what programs are we willing to invest in over the long haul. And it's a very complex conversation, and we're going to need a steady period of time. And I think part of that is better educating our school community about enrollment and what it does and why it's important. And so I bring forward this idea of developing, taking the time to really come together with a comprehensive plan based on all we know today, which when it comes to our enrollment projections, we've been pretty accurate. And it's reinforced every time a university changes. You can look at one within our own boundaries that will no longer be operating. So those are our thoughts administratively. I don't know, Dr. Siebert, if you want to add anything, but I think it's time we need something to guide our decisions on a lot of transactions that could occur. So just interested to hear the committee's feedback on that.
All right, I will start. I think this is probably long overdue, and I take a look at, in all honesty, the great job as a district that we have been doing over the last several years. We've been able to optimize our ESSER fundings to do great things with our facilities and our infrastructure that, quite honestly, without that, we couldn't have done. That put our students and staff safety and enhancements and operational things to use in the classroom first and foremost. We started to take a very strategic approach with funding and looking at the curriculum investment that we've done over the last 4+ years to say, when we did this, we were using one-time funding, but this is going to be stuff that we need to make sure that we keep our hands on and a pulse of. And I think we saw it at the Teaching and Learning Committee 2 months ago, where we really talked about, we are outlining and building in a plan for funding as to when we need to spend, which we're at a key point now that the next phase is, how do we take a look at all of the pieces? So we manage our staffing costs. We know that our staff is paid well when we take a look in comparison to the state and surrounding districts. We know that everything that we do is driven by enrollment, which is staffing, curriculum, and facilities. And just taking a look at what is happening in districts around us and the state, my alma mater college is going through a similar thing. We're seeing school closures in Racine, we're seeing them in Elmbrook. KM's got these discussions, and this is the state of education. This is the new reality, and this is where we're at to be able to say, we have to have some discussions about where this is. And so I'm greatly appreciative of this point in the discussion, and I would agree. I think that we are asking you to be able to come to us and talk about what options do we have, what does this look like, and how do we go forward, and see where that takes us next. But I think the discussions need to happen. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, and just building on that, one of the things I think I really appreciate is the commitment that we're making to make sure we're engaging the community, educating them, bringing them along, providing for their feedback before we're making some of those hard decisions. I'm not sure that's always been the case, or it hasn't appeared necessarily to be the case in the past on some of these difficult choices that the district has had to make. And I'm really appreciative of the fact that we're talking about spending, the remainder of this calendar year, making sure that we're getting information to our community members and making sure that they understand what the challenges are that we're facing, and, making sure we're getting their feedback on some of the different things that we may propose as a district for dealing with this declining enrollment and the financial challenges that presents down the road for us.
Dr.
Yeah,
Piasek?
Thanks. I didn't want to jump in front of anybody else, but I think based on what you're saying, Darren, there's a lot of things that come to mind about organizational transformation. And I think so you brought up the word crisis, just to clarify, there isn't one, right? We've been maintaining year over year, being able to sustain our operations while we've anticipated declining enrollment. I hear people talking about getting creative with how to increase or how to retain enrollment. And I think while that sounds nice, there's probably very little that we're going to be able to do to increase the number of school-age students that are available to us, especially as Wisconsin really does lead in terms of having a lot of choices for families. And I think that's a good thing, because those of us who are interested in education should be interested in kids getting the best possible education wherever that is. So when I think about what is in our control and what is not in our control, or what can we predict and what can't we predict, what we can predict is this continuing decline in enrollment. And even if we are able to do whatever creative things some people think we can do to address that decline, we will continue to have a decline, because you can just see based on the birth rate kind of where we're headed. The things that I think we can't anticipate, but that probably give me a little bit of uneasiness are, the very politicized discussion around Act 10 and what might happen in terms of that. This biennial budget cycle, right? We go through this cycle of, we see these proposals, which seem nice, but then we face the reality of what are taxpayers in the state able and willing to pay for. We have, as I mentioned, a great choice and voucher system in the state, and so we can't necessarily control where those thresholds are and how that affects us, but we can try to be competitive. We don't know the status of the Federal Department of Education going forward, and we do know that we benefit from certain title funds, and we know that our DPI leadership potentially changes every 4 years or so. So there's a lot of things that we don't understand, we can't predict, we can't control, including large referendums that are run by other districts that impact the amount of aid we get. So I think it's necessary and probably timely that we take things, into our own hands and really work from the position of strategy and control and awareness that we have. And I think that's the right thing to do for our taxpayers. And, not knowing what ultimately that's going to look like for us, we know that we could keep chasing this declining enrollment. In fact, I got scolded back in 2021 when I was first running for the board because I dared say that we had a structural deficit, and there was a board member at the time who said we did not, but we did, and it's always been about $2 to $3 million. And I think you all have done a really nice job of managing that, but I don't know, I'm excited about where we're at, right? We have standard curriculum, we have financial plans in place for how to plan and save to replace that curriculum. We've done a lot with our facilities to make sure that we keep them up to date. So, I think rather than wait for something significant to happen that's out of our control, and then we have to be, possibly in a crisis, although like I said, we're not, I think now's the time, because I think we have a good handle on where we're headed and we have good data, and it seems like the right thing to do.
You touched on it briefly, but I think it's also part of the educational process for the school community is what we have been doing to make it work. Because we kind of do it out of process, right? But a lot has been done, and ESSER was one, and just a lot of things. And I think it's really important as we go through this that people know that this isn't the first time we're talking about enrollment by any stretch. It's not the first time we've been looking at budget projections or trying to fund things with opportunities like ESSER. So I think there's a greater good, but really enrollment's going to has to be the crux of the conversation.
Mr. Borowski.
Yes, just, just to add to some of the comments that have been made, coming from the banking and wealth management industry, when you work with clients, one of the things every year they're going to do their taxes, and the tax accountant is going to look at that year and help them make the best decisions. And, a lot of times we can probably all relate to breathing a sigh of relief that, oh, maybe I don't know anything this year, or I'm getting some money back. I think in a similar sense, the district has been covering a structural deficit for years, and maybe breathe a sigh of relief with that too. But it's really the financial advisor and perhaps the estate attorney that helps you do the long-term tax planning. So certainly as individuals, we need to do both, and definitely as a district, we need to do both, the short-term or the annual planning and the long-term. So I definitely welcome it. One question, I'm just curious, has the administration thought about, how long this plan might be, 3 years, 5 years, what it might be?
We've talked about a lot of 2030, but part of that's, I'll be honest, kind of a round number, right? It's going to take us a year to figure something out, a year to implement it. So by 2030, if you do some changes, I think by 2030 you actually can see them come to fruition and hopefully see the benefits of them. But we don't have like a specific timeline or anything like that.
No, we've talked a little bit more about what our current enrollment is, what our current building capacity is, and then projecting that enrollment out through 2034, which we have, and how much space within our facilities do we need to accommodate the amount of brick and mortar students that we have. And I think that's the best information that we currently have to work with. And then ultimately, I think we've proven that together, we're the people we've been waiting for, right? Like, we can do this ourselves, and we can't wait necessarily for the state to bail us out. We advocated very strongly in the last state budget for that low revenue relief. We were spending at $10,200. It went up to $11,000. That was significant. You helped us get there, right? We're going to get to $325, but then when you think about the inflation that we've dealt with, the increase in costs, whether it's been our bus contract or other contracts, it's been challenging, right? And ultimately, we are going to be debt-free in 2 years at the same time, right? We've prepaid our debt. We are very fiscally responsible. And I think a process like Darren just described is another example of us being fiscally responsible, as well as, planning for a future that we control and not someone else.
So Darren, to kind of, I think, follow up to what you're asking, I think that the committee is very much in favor of having these discussions, recognizing that the entire reality of what we're here is to educate the students that are under our care, and pupils happens to be the driver of everything else that happens. So staffing, facilities, and curriculum are all directly attributed to our pupil headcount. And I think when you start to take a look at that, our heart wants to make sure that our students have all of the resources directed at them. And how we get there with that kind of bridge will be for us to find out. So I guess the question then is, what does that look like for next steps from the administration?
Well, our plan is to come back to this committee in April and lay out a plan and a timeline. And then maybe you have the similar presentation at the board or not, that's for you to decide, but to get going in earnest. So, but I think we all have to buy into a process, the touch points with the community and all of that on the front end rather than reacting. And depending on what the issues become, maybe we need more public contacts, maybe we don't, but at least provide windows of time and at least a base number of outreaches to make this thing move ahead. And then ultimately, if anything's going to happen in the 26-27 school year, if that's the year we target, well, we would need around the first of the year leading up to that, so January, to make that happen. So we'd have that benchmark every year of, well, we need about 8 months to get a major change done if there's going to be any. But I want to stress there is no plan. There is no plan.
Yeah.
We don't have a folder sitting somewhere ready to roll it out, and we're going to come in with all the answers in April, because there's a lot of learning and listening to be done between now and maybe asking the board to make some tough decisions later this calendar year.
Anybody else? Dr. Piasek?
Could I just make one clarification? When you talk about the optimization of assets and operational efficiencies, we're not necessarily talking about adding debt. Like Dr. Siebert said, we're on our way to be debt-free, so that's not part of the discussion.
No, in our conversations, and actually we've kind of touched on the theme that Dr. Siebert and I have developed, and I put it in the executive summary as well. I also think one thing that's going to help bring families here is to make STW an affordable option. Mm-hmm. I don't think 100, 200, $250 million, whatever the new high is, I don't even know the number anymore, that kind of referendum and that kind of debt burden is a significant tax burden to put on, whether you're owning or renting or what, we all pay that in the end. So our recommendation, and I think, not to speak for you, Dr. Siebert, but I remember several years ago the board said, when we kind of got into this, we're willing to make big decisions. The board wanted to make sure we did our due diligence before we ever went to the taxpayers again. And I think there's a certain level, and I think maybe a pretty large level of that, of things we can do internally and still offer a very similar product, hopefully, so.
Thank you. That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, so we'll agendize this again next month and come back with some ideas.
Great. All right, our next discussion or information item is the monthly budget report.
Yes, so tax levy, we did receive our payments in, our levy in February, so we're at about 72%, just like last year, of the payout, and then it will trickle in until our larger August payment occurs again. For our budget chart, we are on par with spending in comparison to the year prior. We are at approximately 54% of salaries, and 53% for the benefits, so that's standard, what we've seen. We also, I wanted to bring something else to your attention that we've been doing in our department regarding vouchers, which should have been shared earlier, so my apologies. Karen Ludwig is our AP, and she has been doing a fantastic job of getting people onto ACH. Currently, we have about 4,500 active vendors, but over 1,500 are using ACH today. This past week, however, she had 27 additional vendors, so new vendors set up, but she was able to achieve 42 ACH payments. So she's always chasing the ACH, but she's doing a really great job getting us to numbers that are impacting then the bottom line, where we don't have as much ink, postage, checks, envelopes, and so forth going out the door. So I just wanted to give her a kudos for all the work that she's been doing in that area.
Yeah, that's great.
And then, as we see on the investment report, our interest rates are continuing to slide a little bit each and every month. So if there's anything that you have questions on, though, please, I'd be willing to take the questions.
Any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. We are moving into our other business. First one being, is there recommendations for future committee meetings? Okay, seeing none, we do have a need to adjourn to executive session. We will need to reconvene for one of them. Okay.
Yep.
19.85 sub 1 sub E for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing in public funds, or conducting other specified public business wherever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
I'll second it.
Okay, moved and seconded. Tanya, could you take the roll call?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned. And we are back in session for the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Heather, could you roll call us in?
Yes, Mr. Wad?
Here.
Mr. Zenobia?
Here.
Mrs. Kozlowski?
Here.
Mr. Borowski?
Here.
Dr. Piaksic?
Here. All right, we would be looking for a motion on our agenda item for the We Energies easement.
Yeah, I would move that we approve the We Energies easement needed for the North High School drainage project as it was proposed.
Second.
Okay. Motion to end, seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say no. Passes 5-0. The committee meeting is adjourned.